Welcome to Access Your Leadership, where we share inspiring career stories and talk about ways you can level up your own leadership potential. I'm your host and coach, Hakim, and today I'm here with Jim McElhaney. Jim is a franchise consultant who helps people look at their options for business ownership and the franchise model. Jim, so great to have you here.
Thanks, Hakim. Thank you.
So let's dive in with a leadership win. We were talking about that as a possibility. What's something that comes to mind for you as leadership of yourself or of others that you think is worth sharing?
Yeah. Well, I think, we'll probably get into it in terms of what I've done in my career, but I think being parachuted in as the general manager in India for 2 years for a few thousand people, that was not something that I had on my bucket list. But it was a leadership win, but it stretched me a lot.
Yeah, I cannot wait to dive into that because that's a leadership win you should be touting for years and years to come because that sounds like quite a story. So, yeah, share a little bit about maybe, if you don't mind, your journey, where you're from, what brought you full circle to kind of where you are now.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in New York City and didn't ever think that I was going to leave there. Ended up going up to college in Boston, fell in love with the city, needed to get a job. So I went and got a job in financial services. And the company that I went to work for way back then, I ended up basically staying in that field and a majority of that time with that company for almost 28 years. Loved Boston. Never thought I was going to leave there. And one day in 2006, they tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, would you ever go overseas?" And so it was supposed to be a 3-year deal in London. I decided I was going to jump in and do it, stretch myself a little bit, try a new culture. And 3 years turned into 9 years. It ended up being 3 years London, 2 years India, 4 years back in London. And when I was getting ready to move back in 2015, I mean, the company I worked for was not in areas of banking and financial services that most people think of. We were sort of the less sexy part, the investment services, custody, things like that. But when I was coming back in 2015, I just kind of felt like I needed to break away and do something different. I didn't want to just be someone who did that one thing my whole of my career. I was just hitting 50. So I left the bank. We decided to move to Florida. We'd never lived in Florida, picked the Tampa Bay area as a place to live. And I felt, okay, I'll figure out what I'm going to do next. And if I don't like it here, we'll find something else. But I loved it. I fell in love with the area and I spent a little bit of time enjoying the beaches and then got the nudge at home too that I probably should be doing something else, right? So I started to look at the possibilities of business ownership for myself. I sort of had that itch that I never scratched of being a small business owner, having something of my own. I always was someone else's employee. So I became a client of the group that I actually work with now, FranNet. So my first exposure to FranNet and franchising was really as someone who was looking to make a transition into something totally different than what I'd done. So I did go through the same process I take my clients through today. I ended up, with the help of my consultant, becoming a multi-unit operator in one of the national hair care chains here in the US. If people have heard Supercuts, I was a multi-unit owner of Supercuts for a number of years and did that. And at the same time, fell in love with the process and the culture of FranNet. And so these days I get to help people look at business ownership the same way I was looking at it back in 2015 and to see if there's some options that can meet their goals and help them get into business for themselves.
Wow, what a great story. I love the fact that you really do know how the sausage is made because you went through it and now get to share that experience, your own personal experience with people that you're helping. Let's go back to the decision to relocate from the US to work internationally. What
Yeah.
was your, if you don't mind me asking, your personal situation? Were you married? Did you have kids? Were
No,
you
I was single at the time,
Yep.
so my mom is first generation here in the States. She came from Ireland. So we always had spent summers and time with family over there. So I guess that's sort of, I credit that as sort of giving me that first curiosity about different cultures and what it was like to live and travel somewhere else. And, London, it was our regional headquarters, right? So I had this opportunity to sort of start a new business inside of the creature comforts of, a company that was very established overseas, as well as the presence we had here in the States. And London was going to be a relatively easy market, not the cheapest market, right? But,
Mhm.
language wasn't going to be a consideration, things like that. And so I guess, I just lost my dad a few months before that. So honestly, if they had come and asked me even 6 months previous, I probably would have said thanks, but no thanks. So
Yeah.
I've become a believer in timing and that things happen at the right time because of examples like that. And it was an easier transition, of course, because it was just me going. I wasn't transferring kids into schools
Yeah,
or
sure.
having a trailing spouse or anything at the
Yeah.
time. So,
Yeah. And I'm sorry for that loss. And I can imagine how challenging that was, but then also to then have this big life decision to completely relocate, even if
yeah.
there's no language barriers and there's some of the comforts you described, it's still being challenging. Can you talk a little bit about like what that thought process was for you? I mean, I can't imagine it was just like a, yeah, sure, let's do it. Or maybe it was.
Yeah. No, it wasn't. I mean, it was probably a conversation that went over 2 or 3 months with the company. So, I think in a lot of ways, I mean, people have said to me, "Oh, that was a big risk," and I'm not so sure I totally agree with that because I was going with the company that I knew. I knew the leadership team. I knew the product and the area that they were looking to expand overseas. So compared to the way some people, sort of move for a new company, I was going to just basically, I thought of it like I was going to be working 5 hours earlier than when I normally worked for the same company that I worked for
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
What I underestimated, I guess, is just that trade-off of losing the connections you have, the community you live in,
Mm.
friendships you have, and that reality of having to start all that all over again.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that's a lot. What was it like? I mean, so it sounds like it was a thoughtful process. It was a process that neither you or the other side were taking lightly, and you recognized all of what needed to go into it. Now you're there, you're on the ground. What was it like when you got there? What was the first thing that you noticed as, oh, I wasn't expecting that?
Yeah. I think it was just being deliberate about making sure that I had time outside of my workday, right?
Mm,
So the work was busy because it was a new startup, but at the same time, I could have very easily sort of filled all of my hours with that because I didn't have a local network of people. And so that was really part of what I set as a goal for myself was, I'm going to make sure that this doesn't overtake. I need to think about some outside interests. I need to think about some areas that are going to help me connect and meet other people around here because I've effectively just left my whole circle of friends behind.
yeah. And we're so much more than our titles and our jobs and
Yeah,
what we spend
absolutely.
a lot of our days busy doing isn't who we are at the end of the day as well. I think that, I
Right.
mean, it's so valuable to have this insight that you're sharing. And I want to stay on this for a few minutes because I promise we'll get to more of what you're doing now. But I was not prepared for this to be a an opportunity for you to share with listeners what that expat experience is like, even if it's between here and an English speaking country like England. I think it's important that people recognize that I can imagine, and I know this to be true for a lot of expats, having done international work myself, they go over and they just throw themselves into their job
Yeah.
and they just think, well, I'm over here for X number of months or an X number of years. I'm just gonna just put my head down and just do nothing but work. We
Yeah.
as human beings need a lot more than that, and it's great
Oh,
that you
totally.
recognize that. So
Totally.
what was the evolution of that first? It was first 2 years and then over.
Yeah, so it was those first 3 years in London, and I did probably what a lot of people do. I mean, I joined some of the expat circles that were
Hmm.
available in London for Americans. I was fortunate to sort of get in with a group of people that love to go hiking on weekends. They would sort of jump on a train and go to some corner of the country that we hadn't been to, and we'd spend the day, just out walking around. And so a lot of those people sort of became the foundational people that I met. In fact, I ended up meeting my husband over there as well. So met another American by going to London. So go figure.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
So were these people that you were connecting with as like expat community not necessarily part of your organization or part of the
Not
business?
part of my organization.
Yeah.
I think I was also sort of what I valued about the group that I connected with was that it was this balance between expats and locals, right? And I think, I mean, so often you can go someplace and go live someplace, and then you find you sort of surround yourself with that which you already know. This circle of friends, as it expanded and grew, really became a nice balance between locals and foreigners as well. And
Mm,
it wasn't just Americans, it was people from sort of all over the place.
yeah.
You get to learn about different cultures, but I think having that local element is important as well. You get advice and you get tips, and you end up finding your way into corners of the country and visiting people and their families that you just never would have gotten to see otherwise.
Yeah.
It would have been very easy to just stay in London full time for 3 years, but that
Right.
wasn't the way I tried
Right.
to.
Find the nearest American hotspot and then just go there every day of the week. And
Exactly.
I mean, I
Exactly.
think it's easy to fall into that trap. We find something that's comfortable, and then all of a sudden, that's
Sure.
what we just sort of lean on. So you've gotten yourself this great network, you've gotten a great group, you're comfortable there, and then boom, you're
Yeah.
now off to India.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I went over there to do was to extend a business that was successful in the US. But we were very clear from day one that business to grow. It was in the wealth management space, and
Hmm.
I obviously didn't have the accent and the evidence of being a full timer over there. And so while I was asked to go over and lead getting it started, the intention was never that I was going to stay.
Mm,
And when this was wrapping up, it was 2009. So anyone that remembers 2009 remembers it wasn't the greatest year to be in banking and financial services.
yeah.
And so I sort of had this opportunity to think about very few possibilities of roles that I could step into and stay with my company. And
Mm,
the company, like a lot of other financial firms at the time, wasn't really growing a ton because everyone was retrenching after the 08,
yeah.
09 banking crisis. But what we did have is we had this need for someone to go be the general manager for our client operations center that we operated in India, in a city called Pune, which is about 3.5 hours from Mumbai, no traffic. Haha.
Yeah. Right.
But so the ask was, would I go over to India and be the general manager over there for 2 years? Because we had been in that space for quite a few years, and the company was getting ready to basically be led by the local leadership team. But there was a feeling that they needed maybe 2 more years of someone else really helping them sort of get to where they needed to be. And so I
Mm,
was asked to go over and be that person. So as much as I thought London was a stretch, London was a walk in the park compared to being dropped into India for 2 years.
I
But
believe it. So why do you think, Jim, that you were tapped for that? Was that something that you were advocating for yourself, or was it just positioning or the way that you were seen by leadership?
I think it was the way I was saying. I mean, I was literally I was back in our corporate headquarters was in New York. I was
Mm,
back there on business, and I got pulled out of the meetings I was back for, and then asked if I would consider going out to India for the 2 years. And I think, you know, I've been around the company a good while by that point, and I think I had developed a reputation of being someone who was good at bringing people together, good at connecting the dots. When you're a company that's predominantly based in the US and in the UK, India can feel a long ways away. And
yeah.
so part of what the company saw as necessary in India was really to help the local team there build deeper and stronger relationships across the company so that they could be successful when they were, running their own show, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was really the reason the ask for that was for me to go over there and help them complete that circle.
Wow. I could not have teed that up better. I swear, because what I love is that you're sharing that the reputation that you built, what you were recognized for is bringing people together, and that the relationships that you were going to help to solidify and to strengthen in the office in India, none of that's talking about your technical knowledge, your technical expertise. It was
No.
there clearly. You were
Yeah.
competent and you were capable of coming in and doing the work, we'll say, but the extra that I think a lot of people in leadership roles struggle to realize is that that relationship piece, that ability to connect with people and to be seen as a collaborator, as someone who can lead themselves effectively, who can communicate effectively, goes such a long way to getting noticed and to advancing and to creating a reputation that precedes you. Clearly, you weren't angling to go to India, but
No.
they saw
No.
you as, hey, if we're thinking about who in this organization would be an ideal candidate for this opportunity,
Right.
Jim came to mind because of the skills you mentioned.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah. And I will say, I mean, we had a lot of business lines operating out of that India location that I knew nothing about, right? So, I
Sure.
mean, from day one, my mindset was there are people here that know way more about some of these business lines than I ever knew. So, your point about technical expertise, I think in some ways you were being too generous to me on some of the businesses that I had to oversee when I got over there.
And how did that impact your mindset? So you show up, you're now adjusting to this new culture, this new role, and also realizing that in the process, there are lots of things that you may not be as knowledgeable about as everyone else who's there on the
Yeah.
ground. What was that like for you?
No, I think, first you have to have the self-awareness to realize that, right? And then the humility to digest it.
Mm,
But, again, going back to what I was there for, I actually saw it as the opportunity to help position and promote some of the other people around me because they had the skills that I didn't have. And again, that was what I saw as my mission there, right? I was meant to be there for 2 years. I knew it was going to be 2 years. I knew what the ambitions were around what that next leadership structure would look like and who would be leading it. And then my job was to help prepare those folks and get them ready for the jobs they were going to be stepping into.
yeah. And not put it all on your back, which a lot of leaders default to as an approach. They think, okay, well, I'm the one that's being put in this role. They're expecting me to lead the charge here.
Yeah.
Yes, lead the charge, but you don't need to gobble up all responsibilities and all of a sudden then
You don't
take
have to
that.
be the charge, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like is this just you sort of naturally, Jim? Where did you learn? I mean, one of the things I talk about with my clients, either one-on-one or when I'm doing leadership training, is our role as leaders is always to develop people. If you can think about that as your role first and
Yeah.
foremost, which is not the typical default thought for leaders, it's to fix this or to fix that or to do this or to do that. But actually, if you see your people as this is the overused biggest asset,
Mhm.
and your job there is to develop them, things will improve. You will see the impact positively in your bottom
Yeah.
line and whatever
Yeah.
else you feel like you're
Yeah.
interested in. How was that wired into you? Why was that something that you realized would be valuable as you got to India?
Yeah. Well, I think anytime I've done any sort of, if you want to call it personality competency tests or anything like that, the relationship and belonger side of things always comes out very strong with me.
Mm,
So I think that part of it is just it's in my DNA. It's an interest area. If I go back, I was the product of Jesuit high school, right? So servant leaders for others was, that's in the Jesuit ethos. And I think, those were very formative years for me. I ended up going on to a Jesuit university for college level as well.
yeah,
That ethos was still there, but it was on a much bigger scale. So I really credit my high school experience as really being the place where this was solidified for me. And even when I think about the roles that I've had, I mean, I'm 35 years in corporate or, working. I always say I always have felt like I was always more comfortable being someone else's number two than my own number one, if that makes sense.
mm-hmm.
And I think again, it's back to that contribution, that giving and sort of getting things done for others. That's just the way I've always approached my work.
Yeah. Well, that's clearly paid off. I love hearing stories of leaders who understand this as a concept and being
Yeah.
so valuable. So you had your time in India, successful time spent in India. What an amazing experience that must have been. I've been to Hyderabad, India,
Ah,
and I would love to go back to India on a
me too.
longer trip and just tour the entire country if I could. But what was your big takeaway from that as you then transition back to London?
I probably learned, I mean, the things that I learned over there about leadership were, you have to meet people where they are. And there were experiences that I had over there that I frankly would never have in either the US or even in my experience in the UK. I mean, I'll give you an example. We worked a US or a UK calendar. So imagine asking your entire employee base to work their national holidays because it's not a national holiday in the market where the client is, right? So we would try to do things to make those fun, right? So Indian Independence Day, which was is in August, we would try to make it a special day because these folks were coming into work when all their neighbors were off for the day celebrating.
Mm,
We had them in the office, right? And so part of what I would do on a day like that is my rule was I'm not in my office at all. We were spread across 3 buildings. We had at that time probably 2,500 people.
wow.
And my job on that day was to go around and to see everyone and to say thank you for working that day. It was as simple as that. And we used to do the days like that where we got dressed in traditional Indian attire. I had my stuff and I would wear it and I would just jump in there with everyone else, right? And I mean, it's the only way I knew how to try to be more relatable and to, try to have some empathy for the fact that they were working on a day when ordinarily they wouldn't have been working.
Yeah,
And I should say we had three different shifts, so it turned into very long days.
I bet.
Leadership isn't just for the people who are there from say 9 to 5,
Yeah,
because we had folks that were there, early start of the morning. We had people that were there well into 2, 3 in the morning. So I used to have to toggle. I was deliberate about setting my work schedule so that I was present and visible during all of those shifts in
wow,
any given week or month.
wow. Kudos to you too, Jim. I mean, for realizing how valuable something like just going around and thanking everybody for being
Yeah.
in. I've had so many conversations with leaders when we first start coaching together where I'm asking about, tell me about your one-on-ones or tell me about, your interactions with your employees. And they start telling me, and I'm like, I noticed you you didn't ask, how are you today? I'm assuming you do that, right? And they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I don't know if I
Yeah.
do. And I'm like, okay, well, let's start there.
Yeah.
Let's start there with just the how are you today? Seeing people as people, also, like you said, meeting people where they are and recognizing that people are a lot, and this is what we've sort of alluded to earlier, people are a lot more than just what the role is that they're playing
Yeah.
in that given moment, but they have a whole life that this job, that this career factors into or feeds into or supports.
Yeah.
So I think that's so appreciated. And I love the fact that you're doing that.
I think there's
Um,
two parts to it, right? I
it
think
is.
there's the how are you, the relationship side.
Mm,
So sitting down, I mean, for people that are leaders of large groups that listen to this, I would say spend some time sitting side by side with some of the junior people on your teams and just observe and be interested in what it is they do at the job. And like I said before, I didn't know a lot of the business lines that we had in India. So I was just as much curious as I was,
yeah.
wanting to just understand how they did what they did.
Yeah, I mean, talk about being seen, heard, and valued.
Yeah.
You can't create that by phoning that in. You actually have to do it, and it takes a little bit of time. And when you're talking about three shifts over an entire 24-hour period, people coming in early, people leaving late, leadership is work. And I
Yeah.
think that people sometimes hear that leadership is work comment and like, yeah, yeah, I know. I need to be more self-aware. And it's like, no, there's actually time and energy that you have to invest into being a strong leader
Yeah.
beyond the self-awareness
Yeah.
piece, which is just the first part of it.
Well, and I think people, I mean, back to the point around self-awareness. I mean, even the feedback you get from others, like every large company, we had our own, performance measurement systems and structure and reviews and everything else. But one of the things that I used to always ask my leadership team when we were sitting down having their reviews was I wanted some feedback on how they thought I was doing, how I was doing for them, how I thought they thought I was doing for the organization. And I always say to people, I used to ask three simple things. I used to say, what should I stop? What should I start? And what should I continue? Right. So it doesn't have to be this big 5-page write up. I just say
Mm-hmm.
stop, start, continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd ask them to give me one thing in each of those. And, hopefully we both came out of those meetings better people.
Yeah. I love that structure. I've done that actually in a leadership training where we had the big sticky flip chart,
Oh,
pages
yeah.
on the wall, and the groups had to do start, stops, continue. And more than anything, what you're describing is a, a talking point, a jumping off point for a conversation. I
Mhm.
want to have a conversation about, well, why would I continue doing this? Why would I stop doing this? Why might I start doing something new? And that conversation, I think, for a lot of leaders, and it sounds like that you are one who understands the value of these regular conversations. For a lot of leaders, it's I'm not going to really sit down and get into this until it's review period. So, the annual review, I'll sit down and I'll roll my sleeves up and I'll do what a leader needs to do. And it's like, no, well, what about the other 11 months out of the year?
Right.
And if that conversation is ongoing, it's open, the communication is flowing, then you can have these start, stop, continue conversations. And it's not something you're bracing for or that they're
Right.
unprepared for.
Right.
So I love
Well,
that. There's
it
so
was
much
weird.
there.
I'll tell you, in an Indian culture, it caught people by surprise, right? Because it's a very hierarchical culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea that the general manager or the CEO, or whatever you wanted to call me over there, was asking for, upward feedback. One of the things, when I first started asking that, I wasn't getting complete answers.
I
And
believe it.
and it was an aha moment for me that someone coached me on to say, Jim, you got to realize it's not natural for them to have the boss be asking them for feedback, particularly critical feedback.
Yeah. Feels like a
But
trap.
to continue, they had no problem answering.
Yeah.
The start and the stop, those were a little harder.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that. How did you create an atmosphere where they felt comfortable sharing more of that with you?
Um, I think just well, again, I think it's back to, sort of what was my own style, right? I mean, I wasn't hierarchical. I used to do a lot of my one-on-ones by going to their offices. It shouldn't be that everyone was coming to my office. So I used to go to their offices for some of those meetings, right? Meet them in their space.
Mm.
The only thing I asked my company for when I went to India was the investment in a culture coach. It was a business coach, but I understood business. I understand how we ran businesses. What I needed was someone to help me to be sort of on the backbone for me of Indian culture and understanding, not only just how it runs in business, but how it runs so that I didn't step on any landmines with people and, try to assimilate myself in and at least understand. I wasn't trying to change my style, but I wanted to be conscious of how it was different from theirs so that I could try to flex it.
Mm-hmm. Jim, this is so inspiring. I'm really enjoying this conversation because I think to have the awareness and the humility to say, there's a lot I don't know, I even don't know.
Mm,
I would benefit from a culture coach. Let's just have a conversation about how I can bring my style. And I think that's one thing that stood out to me in your comment about how you created an opportunity for them to be more open with you is
mm,
just being consistent and authentic in your style.
mm.
Them seeing that over and over again, they're starting to see, okay, maybe we get a new leader in here and there's a new style of leadership, but the one that we're having today, the one who's in conversation with us today and the days prior operates in this way.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's okay for us to share. It's okay for us to communicate and to interact in that
Right.
way.
Especially them being part of a US based company, right?
Right.
They were gonna their aspiration, especially as they stepped up and led their own organization, was that the reality of that was that they were going to have more interactions with leadership in the States. They were going to have to be on site in the US more often than they would otherwise. And so part of it was I just needed to help them get ready to meet more of people like me because
Yeah.
that was who was going to be their customer or their boss or their peer
Yeah.
as they stepped up into leadership roles themselves.
Yeah. Well, one could only hope they'd meet more people like you, Jim.
Yeah.
So now take us, you're in India, you're leaving India, assuming
Yeah.
that things were in a good place.
Think we mission accomplished, right?
Yeah,
The
perfect.
the hope was that
Yeah.
the blueprint for what that leadership team was going to look like 2 years later is
Yes.
what came true.
Yeah. And so you
Um,
transitioned back to London.
yeah, well, I thought I was going back to the States, and then there was another project. So again, same drill. Back in New York for meetings, pulled out of the
Yeah.
meetings I was there for, asked to do something else. And I guess, I never really thought about it till this conversation, but what probably was the commonality between India and London was this was when did I move back? 2011 to London. And so everybody in financial services was sort of in the post-mortem of what had gone on from the banking crisis.
Mm,
And
yeah.
we needed to sort of rationalize our European footprint. We had a lot of licenses to banks in different jurisdictions. Each regulator really saw themselves as being our lead regulator. And so it's a bit like having children, right? You never want to say that any one of them is your favorite, but at the same time, you have to sort of pay homage to all of them equally. And again, it was another sort of horizontal role in a very vertical organization where I was tasked with a lot of the regulatory reform and a lot of the changes we needed to make to not only comply, but to keep ourselves out of problems with overseas regulators.
Yeah.
So that's what I did for 4 years was try to help, move that along, clean it up and wrap it up.
So did you meet your husband on the first London tour, or the second London tour?
The first leg. And he stayed in London while I was over in India.
I was gonna say, how did that go?
Yeah, it was it's like any long distance thing,
Yeah.
and I said my I used to sort of try to work my week into all of our shifts. So there were times when I think I fell asleep on the phone at late in my
Been
day,
there.
trying
Yeah.
to ask how was your day, and then but we made it work. It was a test, but we made
Yeah.
it work. And then back in London for 4 more years. So
And then came back to the States together to
yeah,
Florida.
yeah.
Fantastic.
Back to Florida, both changing industries. So, we've both done sort of complete 180s from what we did. in the
Wow.
first chapters of our career, but
Yeah.
keeps it interesting.
So as you left London, were you still with the company or had you ended your time with the company then?
I broke away as I was moving back.
Yeah,
So, they were disappointed. I mean, they had
sure.
lots of corporate headquarters type roles that was going to be my
I'm
next
sure.
assignment. And they all involved living, working in Lower Manhattan and moving back to New York. And I just didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So I told them that I was going to leave. And, to credit the company, I gave them a lot of notice. And some companies, when you declare that, you sort of become dead person walking, right?
Yeah.
Not my old company. I mean, to the day I left, I was treated
Great.
the same way I was every day.
That's
So
great.
I give them a lot of kudos. It says
Yeah.
something about their culture,
It
to be
does. It does. And I think not to diminish that at all, because I think that is true and that's not commonplace. It
sure.
can be a bit rare, like you said, to have a employer respond in that way once you've given them notice. I remember when I left Harvard, I was married, just had kids, twins. They were just coming out of the NICU. I had announced, while my wife was pregnant, that we'd be probably transitioning,
Yeah.
and they knew I was leaving and they offered me an executive coach. And I remember like just getting tears in my eyes because I asked, why do you know I'm leaving? Why would you want to? They said, because you've been so good to us. You've been such
Mm.
a great employee.
Wow.
We want to make sure that you hit the ground running and that you land softly wherever
That's
it
it.
is you land with your new family. And it just warmed my heart because I
Yeah.
thought, wow, what a send off. I mean, to
Yeah.
feel like, I wasn't going to be cast off or ostracized
Right.
because, start taking me off emails and passive aggressively. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
have time and energy for that. And
No,
how
no.
refreshing to hear that you had the same experience after all that work.
I gave 10 months notice to
Wow.
my boss, and it wasn't too long after that that it was common knowledge that I was going. But literally for the balance of that last year that I was there, I never felt like an outsider at all. So
Wow.
that's
I
something about
think it does. It does. And I think, again, like not to diminish how valuable that is from their perspective, it says a lot about you as a leader. It says a lot
Mm.
about how you as a professional positioned yourself, how you showed up consistently. A lot of people, when we're having conversations about the way that they're treated, it's all about everyone's doing this to me.
Oh yeah.
And then when we have this conversation, well, how are you showing up for yourself? How are you positioning yourself to be treated differently?
Right.
You realize that, yeah, well, you're not doing yourself any favors either by showing up this way or that way or
No.
communicating this way or that way. But for you, what I'm hearing through this whole conversation is just this consistent approach to sort of the self leadership, the self awareness, the sense of self that you have that allowed you to be authentic and allowed you to be seen as someone that was dependable and someone who was hardworking and could get the job done beyond, again, the technical, toolkit that you've got carrying
Right.
around. You didn't
Right.
have to flaunt that. It was more about who you were being.
Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I guess in a very simplistic way, I thought about it and said, if I, in those 10 months, if I checked out the things that were on my plate to deliver for the company, people were going to take my cue from that. Right.
Yeah.
And I was still going to leave after 10 months, but they were going to be in maybe, potentially in a bigger mess than they could have been otherwise. So,
Yeah.
just my thought was stick with literally to the last day, and
Yeah. That's so great. So now you're back in Florida and you're embarking on this journey. There's supercuts, and I'm
yeah,
mindful of time, but I want to just give some time to think about now how you've applied all of that knowledge, how you've applied all those experiences, that
yeah,
leadership, all the things you just talked about in the last half an hour
yeah,
to your own franchise, experience, but then also now as a leader for your clients in their franchise
yeah,
journey.
yeah.
What's that look like?
Well, I'll tell you, for anyone who's watching this that is in a big company that has lots of departments that you call for this, that, and the other thing. I remember the days when I would roll my eyes about, oh, I got to call HR, IT, or the help desk. Trust me, you will miss them someday if you go out and become your own small business
Yeah.
owner.
Amen to that. Yes, that's so
Become
true.
every one of those departments on your own, right?
Yep.
So I do miss them, and I have a lot of respect for what those specialists used to do for me and helping me get through my day. Um, but yeah, small business gives you the opportunity to sort of plug in at a whole different level in your communities as well. And again, going back to, I mean, I think when I think about whether it was Boston, London, India, whatever, those jobs were always in big companies that were like aircraft carriers to turn. And so you know, I think now my opportunity to sort of plug in locally, to develop local friendships, local relationships is so much stronger
Mm,
because I have to, right? I mean,
yeah.
that's how small business operates, right? Whether it's networking to build referral sources or to develop a client base or to hire and recruit for your business. I got into franchising a little bit different than most people because most people that I help today will go in and start a new territory for a franchise that's growing. I bought existing locations
Mm,
of a brand that already pre-existed, preceded me. And so my thinking was the attraction for me was they had a clientele, they had a staff, they were built out locations, and I was just sort of the new guy coming into this, as opposed to starting something off from scratch. But
yeah.
um, I think what I appreciated and underappreciated and didn't realize is when you do step into that moving train, you have to then think about culture again. And that was
Mm,
my biggest aha was shaping the culture of the organization that I just became the owner of to not only match my vision for culture, but also to bring it more closely aligned with our brand promise to our
mm,
clients. And some casualties come from that, right? You
yeah.
realize that not everyone is necessarily equipped or prepared to make that pivot. So in some ways, after looking back a year later, I almost had, not that I had a startup business, but I had a lot of new faces on my team a year
Yeah.
than what I had inherited on day one.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun. You get, I'm much closer to the client these days. I'm much closer to the interactions, the regular repeated interactions with the people that work for me or with me, however you want to call it.
Mm,
And I would have been in a corporate setting for sure.
yeah. And I imagine that your experience having to go through, get some of those bumps and bruises along the way as a new franchise owner,
Mm.
that is, you've experienced already a lot of the fears that people potentially coming into the franchise business may
Yeah,
be having. Those,
yeah.
how am I going to manage effectively? What does that feel like to come into something that's already established or to build something new? And so what do you share with your clients that you work with that are sharing with you that hesitation?
Well, I mean, so I want to be truthful with them, but I also want to be balanced, right? My
Yeah,
job shouldn't be to take my experiences and assume that someone else is going to have
sure,
the same experiences.
sure.
But I do feel, and I think it's one of the things that I think can differentiate me compared to some of my peers is that I have had that experience of having gone through the same process they're going through. I had to lie awake at nights before I signed the documents to buy the business, to fund the money. I also, for my own reasons, got out of it 4.5 years later. So, I'm transparent about everything from the start to the experience to the finish for me.
Mm-hmm.
But I also can't just insert that and subject people to that and assume that that's
Sure.
going to be their experience. But it does lead to some good have you thought about kind of questions, right?
Yeah.
And if nothing else, sort of planting some thoughts for them in terms of things they need to be considering that maybe just have been blind spots. It's a little bit of you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yes.
I wish some of that had been brought in on me, quite honestly, before I made the decision to make the investment I made.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's exactly what I was getting at is what an advantage to be working with you to think, yeah, you can offer up, you, Jim, can offer up to your clients. Have you thought about this? But you can also just be someone who fields questions in a different way than someone who's trying to move someone through a franchise
I
process
think so.
purely just to get them through the door. I
Yeah.
think you understand the journey. I'm curious when you think about that, what was your big takeaway? I mean, having had all the experiences that we talked about earlier internationally and now coming back and you're owning and running a few supercuts, what were your big learnings and takeaways from that?
Well, one of them we already touched on, which is culture
Yeah.
and how to create the right culture, because there really wasn't one in the business that I bought. And it's just a function of circumstances with the previous owner and whatnot. But
Mm-hmm.
um, again, it's sort of that appreciating the value of some of the other departments. I think the biggest thing I learned in franchise so far has been as much as you pay a royalty to the franchisor for the support and the resources that they bring to you as a local franchisee, you can sometimes, if you're in the right franchise structure, you gain as much from your fellow franchisees as you do from the
Mm,
floor. I was in a brand that's been around since the 80s. I mean, they were owners in that brand that forgot more than I was ever going to learn. And they were great resources for me. I mean, I can't think of a decision point, a major decision I came to in that business where I couldn't find more than one franchisee who had sort of struggled or debated that same choice and made their choice and lived with their choice. So I think for people who I'm helping today, there's a point in their research that we call validation, where they get the opportunity to talk to other owners in that franchise that they're considering.
mm,
And I think it's probably the most important part of the process, because not only does it give you an independent third party opinion on the support that you get from the franchisor, but it also is the beginnings of you building that network of people you will call when you're thinking through some of your biggest decisions as a business owner for
yeah.
however long you're in that business.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great takeaway. I mean, I think for anyone to listen to, and again, if I parallel this to leadership, it's
Mm,
easy to be in that and think, okay, I'm the one responsible for this. I'm the one who has to have all the solutions. If I don't, what does that say about me? It's
yeah,
like, well, it's okay to ask for help.
yeah, yeah,
It's okay to seek support, and other resources from other people who have either been there, done that, or that's their strength and it's not yours or whatever it might be. So
yeah.
that's a great one.
Thank you.
There are 10, 20 different directions I could go with this. Do you mind me asking, so what ultimately led to you deciding to no longer do that and now focus only on what you're doing now?
Well, so I was 4 years in on my business. I owned 5 locations. My conclusion was that from my financial goals, I either needed to get a lot bigger or get out.
Hmm.
And I should add, my locations were in Southwest Florida, so two plus hours from where I live. So that decision about getting bigger was definitely informed by the up and down the interstate. And so I think in some cases it was somewhat situational, or my circumstances of
Mm-hmm.
thinking about whether that, I think I might have had a different conclusion if my stores were sort of in a radius around the Tampa Bay area, which is
Yeah.
where I live. But when I was, if you think about that business, right, I'm not licensed to cut hair, nor do I want to cut hair.
Yeah.
But my role was really an external role, right? And so I wasn't doing the business justice if I wasn't down there regularly. And
Yeah.
so that was really my, the unit economics and thinking, do I get bigger or do I get out? And fortunately, there was a fellow franchisee in my market who I had good relationships with. We always collaborated and compared notes and everything, and he was in growth mode. And so we ended up having an innocent conversation one day that turned into, hey, would you ever?
Yeah.
Um, and, it was as important for me that I felt good about who I was handing these locations off to.
Sure.
And I respected him as a leader. I knew the kind of business he operated for the locations he already owned.
Mm,
And I knew it was going to be different, but I felt good for the people who worked for me, worked hard for me, to know that they were going to be stepping into a next chapter with someone who was in a lot of ways probably better than I was going to be for them, because he was more local.
mm, yeah. And I think just from the conversation we've had, you have done enough travel for 10 lifetimes. You don't need to be spending all your time back and
You've been
forth
on
on 75.
I-75, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. And what I love though is clearly it had nothing to do with the FranNet support or that process, because you're still with them now doing what you
Yeah,
do. Can
yeah,
you talk a little bit more about that, and
yeah,
then maybe a little bit of how
yeah.
people can get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. I loved it. So what I love about what I do is, I'm not the dentist, right? People are coming to me because they want to come to me, and they're coming to me because they want to consider the possibility of making some sort of a major change in their life. And I love helping people through that, the ability to share my experiences, but really, back to that sort of helper DNA that I have, right? This is what I do now, and it's a great intersect of analytics and psychology, right? People make decisions about becoming business owners partly on the numbers and partly on the gut. And so I love helping people through that, whether it's a yes or a no answer. I mean, of course, I would love it to always be a yes, but the reality is it's not always going to be. In fact, a yes is probably less prevalent than a no. But even still helping someone get to that no is it's okay. I'm okay with that,
Hmm.
because they're making what they feel at the time is the right decision for them. They've researched it. They've done what others sometimes never do, which is they've stuck their head out to see maybe there's something here for me. And even if they find out there's not, at least they took the chance of exploring it. That's why I like what I do. I love the culture of the group I work with. Like every business, we have competition in what we do. We've been doing it the longest. We think we're the best at it. Um, we're relationship people. I love the culture of our organization. So it's
That's great.
been a great landing spot for me.
That's great. And what you do for your clients is you take them through that entire process of sort of having the initial thoughts about becoming a franchise owner, and then through the research and the selection, and then like full execution.
Yeah, so a lot of people come to me and they say, I'm thinking about owning a business, but I don't know what that looks like. I don't even know what that business does, right? That's my dream client
Mm,
because I get to help them get in touch with what their goals are, what their motivations are, their transferable skills. I take them through a process where we build a business model. I try to bring them some possibilities of businesses that could match, most, if not all of those goals. And then I support them through the research they do. I introduce them. I don't sell anyone's franchise. I introduce them to
hmm.
franchisors who I know who could be a good match for those goals they've defined. But, I just take them through, help them through that process, stay by their side until they get to a decision point, and if the decision is yes, then they need lawyers and accountants and payroll people and insurance people. And that's the network that I have that I can try to bring to them to help accelerate their uh, getting into business for themselves.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow, that's so
Everything we
helpful.
do is no cost and no obligation. So our economic model is that franchisors are the ones who compensate FranNet. I say to people, if you're thinking about making a change for yourself, just come learn with us and we'll see whether there's something we can help you with.
Yeah. I think about something as simple as when I launched my own podcast,
Yeah,
I had no idea, well, how do I get this on platforms? What editing software am I using? And
yeah,
a buddy of mine, a good friend of mine, Rob Cressy, he's been doing podcasts for the last 10 years. And I said, I'm just gonna have a conversation with Rob. And we went
yeah,
through 4 sessions, 4 podcast coaching sessions. And in every one of them, it was, here you do this, 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 and this. And I had to do the work. I am the one who had to put in the
yeah,
work, but
yeah.
at least he was giving me the structure, because
Yes.
when you were saying all of the things that you need once you decide you do want to get a
Yeah.
franchise, where do
Yeah.
I even begin? Jim, I
Yeah.
don't know who to talk to for this or for that. You're like, don't worry. I've got all these people I
Mhm.
can put you in touch with. We'll set it all up.
I would say at the start of my biggest competition is Google, right? Someone sits down on
Right.
their own and starts, Googling franchising. Well, before they know it, their phone starts ringing and their inbox fills up with,
Yeah.
lots of opportunities. And they may be good, they may not be good, but there's 5,000 franchises out there. So it's kind of like if you're going to look for a house, would you do it without a realtor? Probably not. And that's
Right.
kind of the sort of professional space that we play in the world of small business ownership and exploring it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, just the comfort that I felt, and I can imagine your clients feel being in conversation with you and knowing that there's no pressure, there's no obligation. This is just a conversation. Let's explore this as a possibility. And if it sounds like something that is aligned with what you want to do, then let's keep the conversation going and we'll
Yeah.
see how you feel along the way. Um, well, I've really enjoyed this, Jim. Can you tell people how they can get in touch with you? They can learn more about FranNet and yourself.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm on LinkedIn as well. So, you can look me up on LinkedIn. I try to put a lot of educational materials out there. So if anyone is thinking business ownership, there's hopefully some things out there that can help you to get a little bit further along in your own learning. Um, we're friendnet.com. I mean, from our website, again, great resources out there for you, but from friendnet.com, someone can drill down and find me from there as well. There's about 85 of us that cover the US and Canada. So there's probably someone in your market. If not me, there's someone who can help for sure.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate this conversation. I did not know we would be talking so much about your amazing leadership journey and the ins and outs and the travels and all of what you had to share, and the wealth of knowledge and experience that you were able to offer those that you worked with, but then also the listeners on this podcast. So it was a new story to me. It was interesting and inspiring in a lot of ways. And I love the fact that you brought all of that now into the life that you're building down here in Florida and with FranNet and for your clients. So thank you
Thank
for the time.
I appreciate it. And thanks to anyone who sticks with us and listens to the whole thing. And You had me reaching back into stuff from my corporate life that I was starting to park way back there. So you've got,
Well, you could tuck it back there
yeah, I know.
for the rest of the day. Right. Right. But I think the conversation was really rich and allowed for listeners to understand the the ins and outs of what leadership is beyond the technical execution of certain tasks.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your time.
I used to have a boss that used to always say, lead from where you are. Do it.
There you go.
Good luck. Thank you for the opportunity here.
You're welcome. As always, I'd love to hear from you about the episode. What came up for you as you think about leveling up your own leadership game? And please, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to like and subscribe. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Hakim A. Lockdar or at lockdarcoaching.com. Thanks for tuning in. Keep being great, and we'll see you next time.